Hi, Isaiah,
Hey,
can
how
you
you
hear
doing?
me?
Yes, I can hear you
Great.
just fine.
Wonderful to see you and meet you. Thank you so much for making the time. I know because I've been following you now that you are a very busy human. So it's a real privilege
Oh yeah,
to speak with you. Thanks for jumping on. Where are we finding you in the world today?
I am in LA currently,
Cool.
fresh
Awesome. I'm a
fresh
little
around the
north of you.
lockdown.
Oh, yes. Here we go. Well, we have 45 minutes. I know it's going to go very quickly because you cover so many incredibly fascinating and timely and important topics in your book. And I know you're doing a lot of further advocacy and speaking up and helping to drive change and awareness across these areas you touch on. So I have probably hours of questions I could ask you. I'm going to try to keep it to a few highlights. First of all, just so we kind of have a framework of what to expect for people who are following. We'll start with just a little bit of an intro about you, your background, how you came to write the book, what your kind of core messaging hopes to be. Also want to talk a bit about just crypto adoption generally, which I know is a big theme. Want to talk a bit about Bitcoin and protest and advocacy, particularly in America today. And then really the meat of, I think, of a lot of what you get to, which is very courageous and pointed, particularly right now around the legacy financial system and the opportunities that crypto really brings to this moment. So how's that sound? We ready?
Sounds, yeah, perfect. Sounds good.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, first of all, I know how hard it is to write a book. So congrats on getting that out and in time. And every time I see a book on the shelf now, I really just think about what the author went through. So I'd love to hear if we could kick off with just a little bit of your background, like what your story is, how you got to where you are today, and then what brought you to write this book and what that experience was like. What drove you? Because it's a big project to pull something like that off, particularly in this time.
Absolutely. So I first learned about Bitcoin in 2013, and of course cryptocurrency as well. I saw a video from Max Kaiser, who's very animated, and he pretty much convinced me that this should be the way to go. And at the time, I was a high school teacher, teaching computer science and game art design. So I was, as a teacher, you're notoriously broke. It's just honest. And I was in a state where it was one of the lowest paying states. So, you start to look for ways to make money. And I thought about Bitcoin as a solution. And, as I progressed through Bitcoin, if you remember the bear market of 2014, 2015, taught me a lot. And I also learned that price doesn't really matter. The adoption of this technology is what matters. So, ironically enough, I learned about it from a banker, but it just kind of showed that they had no clue what they were up against. We had a meeting about it, and he came home. He was my roommate at the time, and he just told me, because I have a tech background, no, you might understand it. I don't think we'll ever use it. So that's pretty much how I got into the space. And once I went through that bear market, started learning more about monetary policy, about history, about how money works, financial markets, learning how to trade and all those things, got me into the mindset of helping others do the same. So in 2016, I started consulting. And one of the biggest things about consulting or education is that most of my clients were Black. And unfortunately, I can't get to everybody as efficiently as I wanted to. I knew that this had to be something that was out in the world as early as possible. And that is what led me to writing the book. Around 2016, I really thought, after Ferguson protests and some of the other protests we had before, it's 2016. That's what I'm thinking at the time. I was like, well, Bitcoin might be able to solve it, because financially, every time we have protests, there's no solution at the end of it. It's just like, all right, well, we're mad, and then nothing happens. So I got that idea. Then I started writing the book last year and published it last year in July. And I really thought, as far as timing, I thought something like this would happen again. There would be some sort of uprising protest. Simply because just following, I'm only 31 years old, but I've noticed every time there's an election year, there's some sort of social unrest. So I wanted to write it before 2020 because I knew something was going to happen. Not sure exactly what, but I knew it would be something. And I wanted to make sure that there was some sort of solution economically that we haven't tried yet. I mean, Black people have gotten jobs. They've gotten into politics. They've become president. They've become, Harvard graduate. They've done everything. We've done everything, and it didn't work. So I was looking for a better solution, and that's what drove me to write the book, and that's why I'm here today.
That is so cool. So I have to ask, it sounds like you wrote it pretty quickly. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like what your actual process is like? How long did it take you? Where did you write? Like, were you doing this on the road? Were you doing it at home? Tell us a little bit of some of the detail around how this came to be, because you did write it at such an important moment, and you're so fortunate to get it out and finished in time for now.
Oh, yeah. And I've always had the thoughts in my mind. So one of the things that helped was speaking into a recorder. So anybody that's looking at writing a book, just talking. And one of the biggest feedbacks I get from the book is it sounds like conversation. It sounds like me talking to you through the book. So it was sort of me talking into my phone, recording it, and then writing it down later. I'm in LA, so there's a lot of great scenery. I wrote 90% of the book outside on a laptop. I just think being in the sun, getting the good old vitamin D, either being in the mountains or a beach, or just sitting outside regular. And, I remember one chapter I wrote in one sitting. I was sitting at a bus stop. I wasn't taking the bus, but it was a guy, homeless guy was sat beside me, and he kind of inspired me to write more, because I was telling him about Bitcoin. He had heard of it, and, I was kind of surprised. So it kind of, helped me to write, inspiration wise going forward. And, as far as the writing process, there is no one way to do it. I would like to think I think like a businessman, but I work like an artist. So if I don't have inspiration, I just don't do it. So I may go a week without writing, but then I may write 40 pages in one day. So that was sort of my process. And even though the book is short, I wanted to keep it short. The book was about twice that size when I first wrote it. I had to take out a lot of stuff because I realized, in my opinion, if you have a very long book, it's a very daunting task to finish it. You won't be as likely to go out and actually do the solutions or practice the solutions in the book. So that was the writing process. And I was encouraging anybody who's looking to write a book, find something and know your audience. So, that was the two biggest things. And that's why I decided to write this book.
That's amazing. Well, your passion comes through a lot in the way you speak to it as well. And preparing for meeting you today, I was able to pick up some of your podcasts and other recorded videos and the like. And if you're not already doing it, I hope that you do prepare an audio version of it, or it is released in the wild, because it isn't yet, because it's really powerful hearing you talk about your message. It's clear it's coming from a very passionate place, and that's super strong. So I love it. Before we move on. Oh, sorry, go ahead. We have a little bit of a delay, so please go ahead.
Okay, the audiobook is coming soon, so I will say that.
Awesome. You're clearly striking a chord, because when I went to buy it, there was a delay. I couldn't just get it immediately from Amazon. So those of you out there who are listening today or in the future to recording, be patient, because there's a bit of a backlog of demand, which is such a fantastic signal. I'm happy for you to have such great reception. It's awesome. Before we move on from the book itself, for those who haven't read it yet, tell us what your kind of core message is. Like, you have to tell us what the key takeaway is. Somebody sits down, they maybe, burn through it in a weekend. What's the, maybe one or two things you want your readers to walk away with, kind of impact wise?
Absolutely. So even though the book is directed towards my community, the number one thing I wanted people to walk away with is the inflation-based economy that we live in under the Fed doesn't work for anybody. So even if you're not Black, everybody is pretty much getting messed over by the Fed right now. So the number one thing you need to realize is that even if you feel comfortable, if you're making money, you should have more. You should have more resources. So even if you feel like you're doing okay, you should have more. And for those who are marginalized, remembering the key of everything, the foundation is the printing of money, and the inflation-based economy that we have takes wealth out of your hands and out of your future generations. So that's the number one thing I want people to remember as they're reading the book. And then number two, as a solution, Bitcoin has been the best store of value the last decade, the best performing asset this year. And as a savings account, nothing really compares. And as far as crypto goes, being able to use it without, without any type of resistance from a government. Remember, in America, we're kind of spoiled. Everybody thinks our money's never going to be devalued. It's never, we're always the #1 currency. But then when you look around the world, the #2 thing I want to make sure people realize is this is an international currency. Bitcoin is, cryptocurrencies are, anybody can use this around the world. So the governments that get in the way that you feel like with rules, all that's going away. Just stay vigilant, keep going forward. So those are the 2 main things I would say.
Awesome. And I think we're cutting right to the heart of some of what I wanted to get to. So I want to run with that. We can come back to things like adoption and a little bit more of the general areas in a moment. But this notion of technology and specifically crypto as a means to equity, justice, and access, that's a super powerful message. And it's coming through in your voice and your various projects that you're doing now, in addition to and around the book. And there's an opportunity for the perception of crypto as maybe sketchy or questionable or even criminal, as to shift into, actually, this is a tool for decentralization. This is a way to kind of advance equity and access on a global scale. For those who aren't totally familiar with how Bitcoin works or crypto works, or maybe even some of the experiences that the Black community has in its history and in its current moment, can you talk to that? Like, tell us how this works and why it is so important, and where you see the potential is. Where could we go with this? And what does it mean?
So when we talk about equity and justice, as far as how things have been and what Bitcoin and cryptocurrency can do, you have to look at history. And I love that Robbie brought up a lot of history earlier. But just to run through very quickly, when you have a concerted effort to take wealth out of one community, which is what has happened to Black people, if people don't realize, the second biggest time for Black-owned businesses and median wealth was in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Right after the Civil War, when we were left to our own devices. Then there was a concerted effort to not give Black people the GI Bill. Then there was a concerted effort to not give Black people housing, which is the source of most generational wealth in the 40s and 50s, with redlining. Then there was immigration, which took a lot of our best people in the Black community and made money for other institutions. Then you had the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s, which also the crime bill came in the 90s, which put a lot of Black people in jail. So economically, there's always been something that has taken wealth out. The problem is the money that Black people are receiving, we're making more money and we still have the same median wealth as the 1960s. That's a problem. So Bitcoin, in my opinion, and cryptocurrency allows a community like my own, which has an unbanked population of almost 25%, to move into an economy where you can't be taken away. And a decentralized economy, anybody can join. It doesn't matter race, religion, it doesn't matter. If you want to use money, if you want to sell goods and services, you can do that with decentralized money. And going forward, it'll only grow because it looks as though more and more people are going to get shut out from banking and from banking services simply because they won't be solvent. So that increase, I think, over time, and increase in liquidity will give people more trust and help change how marginalized communities use money long term, not just in America, but around the world.
Yeah. And this is an area where I think we need a lot more awareness and understanding of how it could work. And I love that you're bringing history into this, because I don't think we can actually have an informed conversation about the future without it. And I want to pull on a particular thread that you raised. You used the term redlining, and a lot of people don't know what that is. So we should start with a briefing on what that is. Second, on discriminatory banking practices that accompanied redlining in, I think, particularly the 50s and 60s in the United States. How would that series of events and that kind of systemic problem have been different if, in fact, the population was empowered with the capabilities of cryptocurrency then? Can we kind of co-imagine, just for the sake of demonstrating the power of this technology, how could history have unfolded differently if we didn't have those barriers and structures in place? So take us through a hypothetical, which is 50 years ago, how it would have been different. Talk us through it. And start with what redlining is, because I think some people probably aren't quite familiar with that term yet.
Okay. All right. So let's start with redlining. So in the 40s and 50s, there was a practice done by the banks where if you were black and you went into a bank to get a loan for a home, even if you had the same qualifications, there were literal red lines drawn around certain zip codes where you could not live. If you wanted to live in that area, there was a concerted effort to not let you live there and increase the amount of wealth that you could have long term. And then also getting denied for loans by the bank made it so that you had to either work longer, harder, you had to have extra, you had to have perfect qualifications just to get going. So that takes time, and all of that stuff basically resulted in being forced into certain neighborhoods by black people. And then those neighborhoods, the property was taken down because if you look at the highway system of America, every single highway or pretty much every single highway runs straight through the inner cities. And that takes away a lot of the property value because it can never really increase that much. So if you just ever notice, drive down a long highway and when you get off, it's most of the time, mostly black neighborhoods. And that was the actual concerted effort for that to happen because of redlining, because of discriminatory bias. Now, if there was something like Bitcoin around, if there was a digital economy, if there was a way to remove ourselves from that system, we could do it overnight. You could have literally community meetings, local meetings where you say, okay, well, the system that we're in right now won't allow us to get loans. They can barely get jobs because there was, segregation at that time. And of course, at the very root of it, the Fed at some point is going to bankrupt us all if you have any type of foresight, like some people did, like Dr. Claude Anderson, some of the Black economics from the 50s and 60s. So first thing I would say is, if we could co-imagine a different world, I would say that most of the Black community would move towards cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. If you can't get a loan from a bank, but you can get a loan from something like Celsius Network because you have cryptocurrency, or you can get a loan through some sort of smart contract, that would have been the route to take. Now, unfortunately, I think a lot of Black people think, well, we have it good. It's all great, right? Not really. So the same thought process that I would have for the 50s and 60s where we could move to that space,